Paris, 1793. A queen kneels on a wooden platform, her hands bound behind her back. She's not the only one. In the months that follow, hundreds of women will climb these same steps. Queens, revolutionaries, assassins, and writers who dared to put their politics on paper. Let's go back in time and see what happened. The French Revolution promised equality. Instead, it built a machine that consumed the very women who helped ignite it. Tonight, we're not just talking about Marie Antoinette. We're talking about the 5 women whose deaths reveal what the revolution really believed about power and who was allowed to hold it. We have to start with her because you cannot tell this story without her. But forget the cake. She never said it. The phrase was already circulating in France decades before she arrived from Austria at age 14. By October 1793, the woman once called Madame Deficit had spent 9 months in a cell in the Conciergerie, Paris's death row prison, under near constant surveillance. Guards watched her even while she changed clothes, terrified she'd attempt escape the way the royal family nearly had in 1791, fleeing toward Varennes in a disguise so poor a postmaster recognized the king from his face on a coin. Her trial lasted 2 days. The prosecution accused her of everything from treason to, in a charge so grotesque even hardened revolutionaries reportedly recoiled, incest with her own son. When asked why she didn't respond to that particular accusation, she turned to the women in the courtroom and said she appealed to all mothers present. It was, by most accounts, the only moment she visibly rattled the room. On the morning of October 16th, they cut her hair short and bound her hands. The same treatment given to common criminals, a deliberate stripping of royal dignity. Unlike her husband Louis, who rode to his execution in an enclosed carriage 9 months earlier, she was driven through the streets in an open cart for over an hour, past crowds who'd waited since dawn. She was 37 years old. Her last recorded words, after accidentally stepping on her executioner's foot: "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Historians still argue about her. Was she a frivolous queen who bankrupted a nation on diamonds and gambling, or a woman blamed for a financial crisis that predated her arrival by decades? The truth, as usual, is less satisfying than either myth. But her death set the template for everything that followed. If a queen wasn't safe, no woman with a public opinion was. 8 weeks later, another woman climbs the same scaffold, and she helped write the revolution's script before it turned on her. Manon Roland ran one of the most influential political salons in Paris. Ministers, deputies, and future revolutionary leaders debated policy in her sitting room, and her husband, Jean-Marie Roland, served as interior minister, largely on the strength of her political instincts. Contemporaries whispered that she wrote his official correspondence herself. She belonged to the Girondin faction, moderate revolutionaries who wanted a republic without the mass bloodletting the more radical Jacobins, under Robespierre, were beginning to demand. That alliance made her a target the moment the Jacobins seized full control in 1793. Arrested in June, she spent 5 months in prison writing her memoirs, a document that survives today as one of the most detailed first-hand accounts of the revolution's descent into paranoia. She knew what was coming. On November 8, 1793, standing before a large statue of Liberty erected in the square, she spoke words that would outlive her. A line historians have recorded in multiple close variations, but which consistently translates to something like, "O Liberty, What crimes are committed in your name? She was 40 years old. Her husband, in hiding, died by suicide days after learning of her execution. Not every woman on this list died a victim of the terror. One of them caused it to escalate. Charlotte Corday was 24, from Normandy, and a devoted reader of Enlightenment philosophy. She held no political office and led no faction, but she believed one man was single-handedly dragging France toward civil war. Jean-Paul Marat, the radical journalist whose newspaper L'Ami du Peuple had called for tens of thousands of executions to purify the revolution. Marat suffered from a severe skin condition that forced him to spend most of his time in a medicinal bath. Corday used that fact to get close to him, requesting a private audience under the pretense of naming Girondin sympathizers hiding in her home region. He let her in. She stabbed him once in the bathtub, puncturing his lung and a major artery. He died within minutes. David's painting of the scene, Marat slumped, letter still in hand, became one of the most iconic images of the entire revolution, instantly transforming him into a martyr. Corday made no attempt to flee. At her trial 4 days later, she reportedly told the tribunal she'd killed one man to save 100,000. It didn't save her. She was guillotined the evening of July 17th, arrested, tried, and executed within a single week of the assassination. There's a persistent legend that an executioner's assistant slapped her severed head, and witnesses swore they saw the cheek flush red with anger. Most modern physiologists consider that biologically implausible, but the story spread instantly, feeding public fascination with exactly how much awareness might survive the blade. It's one of the earliest recorded debates about consciousness after decapitation, and doctors were still arguing about it decades later. If Marie Antoinette's execution was cold and procedural, the Princesse de Lamballe's death was the opposite, and it happened a full year earlier in a completely different kind of violence. Lamballe was the Queen's closest confidant, superintendent of her household, and one of the few aristocrats who could have fled France safely but chose to return to Paris after the royal family's arrest in 1792, specifically to stay near Marie Antoinette. In September 1792, as fears of foreign invasion and royalist counter-revolution spiked, mobs stormed Paris's prisons and killed an estimated 1,200 to 1,400 people over several days. Priests, aristocrats, and ordinary prisoners alike, with almost no judicial process involved. Lamballe was pulled before an improvised tribunal and asked to swear an oath condemning the monarchy. She refused. What happened next is among the most brutal deaths of the entire revolution. She was killed by the mob outside the prison, and her body was mutilated in ways so severe that most serious historical accounts decline to reproduce the full contemporary description. Some sources claim her head was carried on a pike beneath Marie Antoinette's prison window as a deliberate act of psychological terror. Modern historians debate how much of that specific detail is confirmed versus Revolutionary-era embellishment, but that ambiguity is itself telling. Even her death became mythologized within days. She was killed for a single refusal to speak an oath. She was 42. Our final woman never went near a palace or a crime scene. She was killed for something far more dangerous to the men in power, a document. Olympe de Gouges was a self-educated playwright and political writer who, in 1791, published The Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen, a direct response to the Revolution's famous Declaration of the Rights of Man, which had granted rights explicitly to men. That line, from her own declaration, turned out to be grimly prophetic. She spent the following 2 years publishing pamphlets that criticized both the monarchy and, later, Robespierre's increasingly violent Jacobin government directly, a rare position that made her enemies on every side. In 1793, she published a poster calling for a public referendum on France's form of government, an act the Jacobins treated as counter-revolutionary. She was arrested, denied a defense lawyer at her trial, and convicted largely on the basis of her own writing. She was executed on November 3, 1793, 5 days before Madame Roland. A journalist covering her death used the moment to warn other politically active women to, in essence, return to domestic life and leave governing to men. It was, in effect, the revolution saying the quiet part out loud. 5 women, a queen, a salon hostess, an assassin, a princess, and a playwright. Different classes, different politics, some of them enemies of each other in life. But the revolution killed all 5 within roughly a year, and for strikingly similar reasons. Not for what they did, but for the fact that they'd acted publicly, as though power belonged to them too. The revolution that promised equality for all executed more women in 18 months than the French monarchy had in the previous century. And it did so while writing some of the most famous documents about human rights in history. Olympe de Gouges saw that contradiction coming before almost anyone else. She wrote it into law before the law ever caught up to her. So tell me, which of these 5 stories did you already know, and which one did the textbooks leave out? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want to see more, like and follow.